Welcome back to the Demon Slayer Comparison Series! Now in episode 5 of the Swordsmith Village arc, which covers some of chapters 110, all of chapters 111 and 112, and a little over half of chapter 113. This episode was insane. I think it's no understatement to say that Ufotable set up a home run in this episode and completely blew it out of the park at the end. I'm sure you all know what moment I'm referring to, and I can't wait to study the S+ tier Sakuga that a certain animator graced our presence with. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, we have a lot to cover between now and then. To start, the beginning of this episode actually begins as an anime exclusive scene where Kotetsu is directing Tokito to Kanamori while being carried by him. It's after Tokito locates Kanamori and casts Kotetsu aside that we start following the events of the manga on page 16 of chapter 110, where Tokito prepares to fillet the fish attacking Kanamori. I mentioned this anecdotally last time, but I love how the shadows are cast in this for us. Tokito is keyed on 2s, but the composition that updates every frame is displayed on him as well, and it really rounds out the picture quite nicely. That quick shading mixed with the blurry background behind him truly dictates Tokito's speed here, and the added rays of light emanating from the depths of the forest simply embodies his cool and collected skill set. After all, that mysterious light isn't always there. It disappears after Tokito decapitates the vase fish that was trying to climb a tree to get to Kanamori. Something that the fish only seems to do in the anime, since the manga never clarified if Kanamori had indeed climbed up a tree in that version. But regardless, now he'll thank Tokito while climbing down from said tree, where he's met with a relieved Kotetsu at the bottom. Meaningful changes for narrative cohesion, but I will say that the anime also adds some parts that are just a tad more superfluous too. Like how Kanamori's speech afterwards no longer ends with him cutting himself off, but rather now ends with Kotetsu cutting him off to remind him about Haganezuka instead, and from there we'll actually get to see them all take off together this time, while getting some new dialogue from him both before and after the opening plays. None of these new lines are really that important. Kanamori just tells us in advance now where we're going, as well as express some desire for Tokito to protect the village. Besides that, everything up to the end of this chapter is just about what you'd expect, from Tokito detecting the spooky vase up ahead to Gyutaro's emergence from said vase. We'll get back to him later, but for now, let's move over to the village side of things on the next chapter. Just kidding, nanjette, because that part is actually on the next chapter, chapter 112. That's right, the anime is skipping ahead here, so in an attempt for us to not get too lost in the chronology of things, I have some crucial information that I need to share with you guys before we move on. See, at the end of episode 4, you might have recalled seeing Mitsuri on her way back to the village. Well, as it turns out, anime viewers got to see that a lot earlier than the manga readers did, as this is something that happens at the end of chapter 111, right after Tokito got hit with the water prison jutsu. A jutsu that won't trigger until later on in this episode. So by this point in the anime, Tokito's in a much less tighter spot by the time Mitsuri shows up to take care of all of these fishies. Fishes that are clearly CGI, but their sheer number and replicability kinda demands as much. While these hyper-realistic designs kinda make it hard to hide what it is, at the very least their frame times were limited to avoid too much visual whiplash between them and the 2D villagers, a lot of whom were actually in 3D themselves. I might not be the biggest fan of these things, but even I have to admit that they're animated quite distinctively. This is just about how I'd imagine a fish with opposable thumbs would operate on land. But no matter how many times they thrash around like a bear, not a single one of them has any chance in hell against Mitsuri. She takes them all out so quickly that an arrangement of smear frames and slash effects is basically all we can see. Well, we technically can see her sword if we look closely enough, but these scenes do pretty well to not spoil the official reveal of that sword until later. Her skills were so impressive that even after the villagers gush over her a bit, one of them in the anime now asks her to rescue the chief while she's at it, as if that wasn't already on her agenda. He's definitely gonna need the help too, because his life is in the literal hands of the mastermind fish that's taken out pretty much every other person around it. Though the anime does show that one person hasn't been taken out yet before he's yeeted into a wall. But never fear, because Mitsuri is here and she brought one of the most unique blades I think I've ever seen in this show. I seriously love this thing, because while its contours do resemble that of a katana, this blade feels more akin to that of an urumi, a curling blade that originated from southern India and is one of the most difficult and dangerous weapons one can use. While a lot of people would equate Mitsuri's application of this weapon similar to that of a whip, with her gymnast-like moves, she almost looks more like a ribbon dancer to me. The main difference being that this ribbon seems to expand and constrict, allowing it to occupy our vision up close at all times regardless of how far away she is from the camera. Oh, and speaking of that camera, there is a lot of dynamic graduality behind it. From the slight tilt of the frame before she takes off, to the very light pan once she finishes the job. The presentation here is so graceful, and the music and sound effects also perfectly complements the elegance of her moves. This is a great first showing for her, and it really makes me excited to see what else she'll offer going forward, besides giving the chief here a newfound desire to live on. Thanks to Mitsuri's quick acting, the immediate threat to the village should be pretty well contained by this point, but the threat still lies with the upper moons. One of which, well, 4 of which, is giving Tanjiro and Nezuko a run for their money. Except Nezuko is the only one running since she woke up before Tanjiro did. We talked about these lightning effects plenty last time, but now it's contributing to a lot of collateral damage. The difference in background art between this cut and this one is pretty staggering, and that damage only increases in motion, with quick swaps to animation for the broken down building, as well as all the smoke that it's whipping up. Nezuko's quick footwork got them pretty far, but in the end, Tanjiro wasn't able to be awake for more than 5 seconds without getting struck by lightning again. Though this strike did seem to do more damage to Nezuko, as now it looks like it's Tanjiro's turn to carry her away from danger. This actually leads us into some pretty substantial changes. See, normally as soon as Tanjiro carries Nezuko out the door, Sekido would tell Karaku to just screw it and blow the whole building down, but since that whole building down part is left out in the anime, Karaku will interpret the order for him to chase them down to blow them away instead, leading to a little anime-exclusive chase sequence down the hallways while Tanjiro thinks of a solution to this mess, something he'd normally think about after the building completely falls to pieces. Music producers Go Shina and Yuki Kajura really killed it in this scene. They don't nearly get enough credit in this series, but they have such a strong attention to the desired atmospheric pressure that this show demands, and they deliver on it when it counts. It's such a bleak and dangerous moment for the siblings here as Karaku taunts and attacks them through the long hallways. One attack of which will actually just demolish the building anyways, bringing us right back into manga territory where Nezuko grabs Tanjiro's katana mid-air. So while Tanjiro wonders what she's up to, this is where we'll break for our commercial break cut screens. The first one is reference from Mitsuri's appearance to save the chief on page 7 of chapter 112, and the second one is reference from a part of the title page of chapter 111. Once we get back from commercial break, we can continue where we left off on chapter 112 as Nezuko continues to firmly grasp the sword.
Firmly grasp it.
While Tanjiro screams at his sister to stop whatever it is she's doing, we get a very quick anime exclusive scene of Sekido and Karaku looking for the two of them, as if they didn't just hear Tanjiro yelling a second ago, and after some more objections from Tanjiro telling his sister to stop, this is where we'll take a break from chapter 112 as the anime will have us rewind all the way back to the beginning of chapter 111, where Tokito is getting ready for an upper demon battle of his own. This thing and its baby hands are mighty creepy, so it makes sense that the two behind Tokito fell to their knees. Except in the anime, they just inch themselves closer to Tokito, much to his disgruntlement. But unfortunately, that wouldn't protect them from the psychological damage of seeing their mangled swordsmith brethren. It's pretty horrendously gruesome. It even elicits some anime-only reactions from Tokito this time. I can't really show that creation here though, otherwise I'd get a ticket from the YouTube censorship police, but we'll just leave that breakdown for the uncensored version of this video. Ufotable certainly wanted to make a statement about Gyoko's evilness here, and this more perverse movement style achieves that pretty damn well. But Tokito's had just about enough of this third-rate art show, so now it's time for him to give us our next big showing of mist-breathing greatness. We covered a lot of this last time, and by and large, there's not much else to say here except that this mist sure does wonders for cut transitions with those dispersed shades of blue and white. The way those different layers utilize those shades really sets it apart from other breathing techniques. But just like last time, Tokito's gonna have to have a move that's a lot faster if he wants to gain the upper hand on these upper demons. At the very least though, he's not giving this one enough time to finish describing his sick taste in the arts, but Tokito can tell that just cutting the vase when he comes out won't be enough, especially with this new line of his where he says that he can barely feel any resistance when doing so. But even if these vases are just a conduit for Gyoko, seeing them get destroyed really does seem to irritate him. So as such, he will use a move that he's been spamming since he arrived. Tokito doesn't exactly comment on these fish appearing here like in the manga, but it still will elicit a flight or fight response from him regardless. It was a pretty close call, which in the anime even got Kotetsu to outwardly express his concern for Tokito earlier than in the manga. But unfortunately, that drew the fish's attention to him. The fish still do attack him anyways in the manga, and Kanamori still does make a valiant attempt to shield the kid, but in the end, Tokito will always be the one to bear the brunt of that attack. even if it's at the cost of getting one of the most painful piercing jobs in anime history. I know it's a demon slayer's job to protect civilians, but ever since he met Tanjiro, he seems to have developed a caring attitude towards everyone, to the point where now he's making moves that diminish his chances at beating this demon, because naturally these needles would be poisonous. Though despite the attack being closest to his head, the poison rushing there doesn't seem to stop Tokito's mind from recalling yet another memory from his past, the lines of which have been split up between Gyoko's taunts and the mystery figure housed within this memory. Thanks to Gyoko, he inched closer yet again to remembering the fate that befell him, as well as inched closer to Gyoko's neck. Were it so easy, because Gyoko had a trap card of his own ready in the way of a water prison jutsu, a move so powerful it can keep characters occupied for many episodes at a time, especially damaging here because Tokito can't use any breathing techniques in it. So yeah, things aren't looking too bleak for Tokito right now, and it's bleakness that the manga would normally flip around by ending the chapter with Mitsuri's appearance, but since we already covered all that, this means that we're finally done with chapter 111 and can move back to where we left off on chapter 112 as Nezuko continues to hold on to the blade. As it turns out, she was just trying to smother the blade with her blood. Sounds kinda screwed up, but boy oh boy did it make one badass version of a katana. One that Tanjiro will call the Exploding Blood Blade, or Blazing Blood Katana depending on who you ask. This sword is lit, literally, and it made me realize that throughout all my videos of Demon Slayer, I've never once talked about Nezuko's blood demon art. So seeing how integral her abilities are to the show and that it'll play a major role in Tanjiro's upcoming attack, let's analyze it while we gradually move into chapter 113. Like the samurai from Tanjiro's inherited memories that this mystery lady is talking to, it looks like Tanjiro was also able to accomplish a similar feat of changing his blade's color, though it is kinda hard to make out that color change through all the fire. We've seen these flames used by Nezuko a handful of times, but it sure has changed a great deal since its first unveiling in season 1. Way back when, the color scheme leaned far more on the red side, and this type of extreme angularity and frayed and bleeding line work didn't really make the same sort of resurgence. Instead, future iterations would show a much looser and blobbier style, not to mention a more pink one. Sure enough, the circumstances for her first time using it, as well as the gap in time before she finally uses it again in the entertainment district, do need to be taken into account, but in spite of that, the standardization of its employment in the entertainment district still shows many different variations of how this blood art is animated. Besides the fact that pink and white was eventually made to be the primary colors here, how they're layered within the effect can vary. Notice how the pink and white will flip locations every so often. I suppose the desired contrast of the scene has some sort of weight in the decision making here, but even more changing is how those colors meet with one another. Sometimes it's cut with some intermittent line work, or other times they just sort of bleed into one another. So yeah, like Zenitsu's moves, a lot of this stuff changes depending on what's going on, but in most cases, Ufotable usually sticks to the order from the outside in of a black outline, then pink, and then white, while many times adding some extra gradients to those fill layers as they go, mostly to the pink layer. That extra tinge of red is a more common addition to the outer area of the flame, but it's not always there. But what is always there is the glow that emanates from the edges of these 2D keys in the way of some 3D plasma-like renders. This is the singular most consistent thing for every single time Nezuko has used her blood art, and sometimes it's more pronounced, but overall it rounds out the effect quite nicely. There's so much to talk about with Nezuko's attacks, and I didn't even mention the completely CGI fire that sometimes overlays the 2D ones, or how there's a slight wavy displacement and blurriness applied to simulate what you would normally see when looking through a fire. Not to mention the tailored opacities to show what's behind those flames. So yeah, there's a lot of history that went into this blade, and not just in the visually iterative sense, but in the diegetic sense as well. Because from the perspective of Tanjiro, he believes that this blade is the culmination of everyone's desire to help him help others. Thanks to his sister, Tanjiro just lit himself ablaze yet again, and with it, he brought power that succeeds even that which he used to defeat Gyutaro. So you know the charge for this attack is going to be crazy, and luckily I was able to find some reference material for the adaptation of this panel. Finding stuff like this doesn't happen often for this show, and it is only one frame, but it is nice to see the full picture without the pan, as well as all the compositional notations and timing graphs. Oh, and speaking of timing, once again I think computer tweening took the role as an in-betweener here. I'm not 100% positive though. The fact that the entire image is on 2s as opposed to 1s kind of throws me off a bit, but there's something about the relative structure of the characters' faces and hair as they morph into different orientations. How Tanjiro looks at the camera here just looks a little bit off to me. Not to mention the nearly replicate drawings of perfectly anchored gradual upward movement. A good example would be these hands. They barely look different between frames at all. But don't get me wrong, whether it's live 2D or not, it still looks stunning, and I do believe there are some hand-keyed animations here, such as the flame on Tanjiro's blade or the beginning of the pan where Tanjiro starts lifting up his blade. That I'm pretty sure of. Ufotable certainly doesn't make it easy to tell. There's a reason they have a reputation for seamlessly blending traditional images with generated ones, because there's just no other studio that comes close. However, that does not change the fact that for the highest of the high action material, they still desire and require the talent of the best Sakuga artists out there. And for this next scene, they chose the strongest artist they have in their arsenal. A man so integral to Demon Slayer's hypest moments that he's easily considered the studio's trump card for traditional animation. And his name is Nozomu Abe. The same guy who did this cut, and this cut, and this cut, and this cut is back once again to wow us, and he hit another record home run. So let's go frame by frame and break down how he pulled off this 10 out of 10 piece of eye candy called the Sun Halo Dragon Attack. Before Tanjiro even starts moving, we're hit with 5 wonderfully divergent impact frames just to emphasize the charge of this attack. The second one being especially notable with its scratchy line work housed in Tanjiro's frame to display the focal point of energy building within him. It's as that charge is released and the energy disperses from that point that beams of exposure flow out into the rest of the frame. Naturally, all this is done on ones, but for those of you who aren't familiar with Nozomu Abe, he kinda likes to do everything on ones, so you know that when Tanjiro takes off, both him and the flames he creates will look smooth as all heck. Oh, and speaking of those flames, we need to talk about those before Tanjiro takes off, because this is not the same Hinokami Kagura we're used to, as this one combines the color schemes of both Tanjiro's flames and Nezuko's blood art. So now, in addition to the originally prominent yellow and red color scheme from Hinokami Kagura, now it has the primary pink and white from exploding blood added into the mix. Hinokami Kagura already had some white in it sometimes, but since it's a requirement for Nezuko's moves, it has to be used all the time now. Not to mention the color black that comes from both moves. Keep in mind, these are just the basic requirements for Tanjiro's new attack, as when it's being executed, there are even more colors thrown in here and there. Now that's a lot of colors that need to function cohesively together, so how are they all sorted? Well, focusing on the required colors, their assignments more or less go like this. Starting with the colors yellow and pink, if we remove all other colors, you can see that they have the very important task of holding down the fort as the foundational gradient for this move to form both the backdrop and the base shape of the flame. Usually the tip of Tanjiro's blade starts with pink and becomes yellow the further he moves away, but in truth, the start and stop points of these colors will both shift around and loop on a per scene basis. So that begs the question, if this ever repeating gradient acts as the core, then what about the colors red and white? Well, they carry the task of being the detailers of the flame. As such, their arrangement is both sporadic and spotty. Sometimes they can provide discernibility features like for the dragon head, but mainly they're there to break up the base gradient and give the effect more depth and tangibility. The red being especially prominent as it tends to act as break-off flames a lot of the time. How and where these two colors are layered in is about as random as a raging fire could be. So much so that not even the spotty inner line work around them can contain their vibrancy, if there's even line work at all. As such, colors are constantly spilling into one another, and new and smaller gradients tend to pop up seemingly out of nowhere. Even most of the inner edges have some sort of color gradient applied, and all of this color leakage really keeps these flames feeling like a rainbow of vibrancy. Its colors even leak out into the rest of the scene with the glow it emits from all edges of the outer line work. We'll talk about those glow effects and how they affect the rest of the scene in a bit, but now that we've gotten a general understanding of the color scheme of Tanjiro's new move, I think it's about time we finally break down how he executed the whole thing. So from the top, after Tanjiro takes off with a solitary impact frame / light leak combo, he leaves behind a giant plume of flames while he rapidly approaches the camera. And as the red glow of hell rapidly approaches the demon, this frayed sword connecting with his neck will lead into a pink line that desaturates the poor man and transitions us into some silky smooth sword cutting ASMR. Seriously, with how the skin of this demon wrinkles from the bright red edge of the blade while the lava-like juices flow everywhere, it's almost like watching one of those 1000-degree knife videos from back in the YouTube dark ages. Composition shines so brightly here, and especially so in the next cut, as on its own, it sold the impact of Tanjiro completing his first slash. Birdman here barely moves a muscle when he gets sliced, but with the rainbow line running horizontally into him, as well as the two solid black and white frames acting as impact frames which trigger the CGI debris to come flowing out of Tanjiro's feet, Ufotable successfully sold Tanjiro's power without overly relying on Abe. Because this awesome straight ahead flame work aside, he still has so much more to show us in the way of some expertly timed character pose to pose work. I'm sure I said this a lot during the Entertainment District arc, but it speeds up and slows down at the perfect times, knowing exactly what poses to emphasize before a quick readjustment happens. And when it does happen, we can expect some very colorful smear frames to accompany them. Truly, the amount of power that can be built with double the frame count is no joke, and the brushwork that accompanies these fast readjustments just builds that power even more. And I'm not just talking about Tanjiro's moves here, because as he makes his way to his next victim in the following cuts, the camera work follows a very similar rhythm of holding an angle then quickly readjusting into a new one. Everything just flows together so seamlessly, and mixed with the supremely wavy line work, not to mention the speed of the background comp, the power that Tanjiro exudes just continues to grow. You might have noticed those wavy lines earlier, as it is very indicative of Abe's style, but in addition to both that and the variable line thickness of Sun Halo Dragon, Abe also applied some very rough and bold line designs for extreme close-ups of Tanjiro. So with all this sudden buildup of energy, it's only natural that this second strike is followed by the most fantastical arrangement of colors thus far. To be fair, this guy did almost manage to get his wind attack off, but not before his neck was cut by another impact frame. Also, we couldn't really see this for the first strike, but Tanjiro is also cutting their tongues at the exact same time, since he learned that was their weak point earlier. Tanjiro is dispatching his foes with so much precision, and I love how his stances change right as he readies himself to go on to the next one. More great timing work by Abe right there. You can really see him building himself up in real time, and by the time he's ready, he's already disappeared into the flames of the dragon. And with that dragon leading the way, Tanjiro really looks like a force of nature as he prepares his final strike, and let me tell you, Abe's line work is never more pronounced than now. Bold doesn't even begin to describe the scene at this point. It's absolutely crazy, and the red glow that floods around Tanjiro is brighter than it's ever been as he charges the camera to demolish this demon. It's 100% the most aggressive strike out of the three, and this demon's Shakujo-like polearm didn't stand a single chance in hell at stopping this attack, and neither did his tongue or neck for that matter. And with that, Tanjiro has officially finished his range of attacks and is awarded with the chance to show off a bit with a deep slide and spin to come to a stop and then completely obscure our vision with flames to see his awesome pose with his dragon on the other side. Really brings you back to his water dragon days, doesn't it? The entirety of what we just saw, from his takeoff to his slide finish, is the full adaptation of this 2-page illustration by Gotoge, and it exceeded every expectation. The path that Tanjiro forged was more detailed than anyone could have asked for. This was a display from Tanjiro unlike anything we've ever seen before. His adaptability and evolution just hit another benchmark, and it is by no means a one-off, because he seems confident that he can recreate this ability and possibly even use it on the fourth demon that he couldn't locate. Little did he realize that Genya already took care of that perfectly well for him. As for how he did it, well, it looks like there's more to Genya's abilities than meets the eye, as his eyes actually look pretty demonic nowadays. There's even an added tinge of yellow to his hair in the anime. This guy certainly is an enigma, but before Tanjiro can even get an answer to all these questions he's having, Chapter 113 is unfortunately cut short on page 13, as this is where the episode comes to an end. Oh wow, what an absolute banger of an episode. Ufotable proved once again why they are one of, if not the best animation studios in Japan, and Nozomu Abe once again proved how he's one of the best animators of his generation. There was so much to cover today, and it certainly wasn't easy to break down, but for the amount of detail that's put into this show, it's only natural that you'd want to point out as much of it as possible. And even then, I'm sure that there's still so much more that can be said, which is where you guys come in. What did you guys think about this episode? What caught your eye the most, and how well do you think the manga was adapted here? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Personally, I thought they hit it out of the park this episode, but somehow I get the feeling that they're just getting warmed up. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, I would appreciate it greatly if you could give the video a like, share it with a friend, or maybe even get subscribed for more Demon Slayer content like this. Also, if you want to give me some extra support, check out my Patreon for access to live reactions of Demon Slayer, if that's something you're interested in. Actually, I'm 3 episodes behind right now, so to make amends for that, 2 of those episodes will be available for free for a little while. More information about future videos will be on my Twitter. Thanks for putting up with my inconsistency, everyone. Well, that's it for me. Once again, I hope every single one of you watching has a fantastic day. And also, once again, this is Registry, signing off. Take care, everyone.